Yo, 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 what is going on, AoEM Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and I thought today would be a great job to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the Eternal Empire project, which is the largest jump/new start project in Age of Empires Mobile right now. As of last recording, they were at 1,100 members when we did that front-facing kind of initial overview review of the project based on their Discord. And as of recording now, they're almost at 2,200 members. So they have doubled in literally less than a week, which is awesome to see. And I'm definitely wishing Greedy nothing but the best, and his team and the group there. So they've recently landed in 42. That's where they're populating in now. And the Town Hall was recorded on the 12th, so almost a week ago. And we're going to listen in on, do they have good answers? Does the leadership have good answers to questions that are being asked by the community? Because to me, doing town halls, I think, is really a very important thing, not only for groups and projects to do before you jump, but also after you land in the kingdom. There's so much value that you can get out of it. And in addition to that, it gives you an opportunity to put a voice to a face and let you hear from the people in management, leadership, decision-making positions themselves on how are they going to address things, and do they have good answers to good questions. So we're going to give you an overview on some of the departments, and then we're going to go into some of the Q&As, and I'm going to just give you my honest thoughts on how I think they answered the questions, if it was good or bad, there's some opportunity or not. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. As always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up because it helps out a lot. So let me give you a little bit of prefacing and historical reference for myself because I do think that it is important, as we did last time when we did the review. So I have been playing Kingdom Builders for a while, since about 2013 with Game of War, and I've played a number of games from then onwards in different amounts of capacities, but most notably playing Rise of Kingdoms, Infinity Kingdom, and eventually Call of Dragons. I've done 9 projects at least right now, and most of my projects have all been kind of mega projects, so they've never really started with less than 6 alliances. It's always been 6 alliances or more. And Greedy was someone, as I had mentioned before, who did join one of my previous projects back when we were playing Infinity Kingdom. That's where I had the opportunity to meet him from. And a number of other people that had then moved over to play Call of Dragons that are in this Internal Empire project as well, that I had the opportunity to meet and to play with when we were in Kingdom 4? I think it was, no, Kingdom 2. Excuse me, got to remember these things. With that in mind, let's go ahead and give this a listen. So we're going to go through and I'm going to show you a couple slides from the departments, and I'll kind of give you an overview. And then we're going to go into the diplomacy team, because I thought there was a good answer there, and then we'll go into some of the Q&As. So the first one is them kind of just going over their presenters and who's going to be speaking. There's a number of people here, but you can kind of see Delis is diplomacy lead and council, Greedy recruitment lead, council lead, Amun is warlord lead, and then a couple of the things that they're going to be touching on. If we end up going to the event management, which a slide is here, and I'll give you an overview. So Prisma is the one who leads this up. Again, they did a good job overall with the Town Hall, I thought, because they really were able to get everyone lots of important pieces of information and also keep it relatively short and very concise per each person's speaking time. So I thought overall, like I said, it was a good job. In the events portion, they talk about how they have an events channel and all the events are listed out there. They have a raid helper, which is going to kind of help them figure out times for people that are going to be able to participate in raids and potentially other events. This is all great stuff. Typically, when you are putting an event team together, you usually also want to have a library where you have kind of like Google Docs, either Google Docs or whatever you use, if it's a Drive, OneDrive, etc. And you have kind of easy copy paste where you can apply those things to alliance mails if you're trying to include multiple events and you're giving like, hey, this is what the event name is, here's a brief description of what the event's about, and then here's how you could take advantage of the event. And that's always a good thing to do, even if you're summarizing events. So like an example would be, let's say you can look at an event calendar in game and the events will refresh every Monday in this example. When Monday comes around and you get a chance to see what the events are going to be for that week, you should be sending a alliance mail out on that day, right, as soon as you can. And then also a Discord announcement of like, hey, here's the events that are happening in this week. And then here are message links to each of those guides in the forum channel or wherever else they might be, and then also reiterating that in-game and an alliance mail. And it's really important to try and set some of these early precedents so that way everyone has realistic expectations on what they are going to be getting and understanding that you are doing everything in your power to give them the best possible start throughout the entire season for the home kingdom and then beyond. But I think a lot of what they have already mentioned here is really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that applies as well. In addition, if you're able to get times from people on when they are able to participate in events, whether that's raids, if that's PvP scrimmages, if that's KVKs, if that's AVA events. Having that information as early as possible can really help you plan for the future. So again, I do like to hear that from the team so far. Okay, let's go to internal affairs, which I think was the next one here. Or I'm sorry, yeah. And Blader, which again sounds like a data homie after cut off the old block. He talks about how they're using Empire points, which is like their custom point system that's also weighted and configured based on a number of factors. Some of those being PvP merits gained, PvP contributions, alliance contributions, donations, build times, etc. Right, participating in events, and then essentially scoring or allocating a point value for each of those and then weighting them appropriately. An example of this is they talk about kind of showing up for PvP in KVKs is usually going to be weighted higher than something like, donations or build times, for an example. But each one will kind of have their own point or weighted system. And then they also talked about how it will be a good way for them to kind of gauge activity and a number of data assets throughout the kingdom, starting in the beginning, and kind of mentioning how they have like this average, good, great, below par, underperforming way. Now, I don't know if that information will necessarily be public. I don't know if it might be the best idea to do that. However, do I think that collecting a lot of activity and contribution data early on, and even if we're not talking day one, right? Because the thing is, you have to also factor in that there's going to be a settling period where usually within the first week or two, that typically is where everyone is kind of getting settled in once again and figuring out, who's still going to be active, who's dropping off. You can also notice some drop-off activity as well from people that are maybe played for a couple days and they're just saying to themselves, okay, this really isn't for me. Not only do you have to factor in that not everyone who's actually in your Discord is going to join, but also that you're going to see a second wave of drop-off once you start, and that typically has the highest percentage chance to happen within the first week or two as people are figuring out on if this game is going to be something that they enjoy playing just on a regular day-to-day, which for them is typically beyond their participation with your project. For them, you have to understand, for every individual, it's personal. It's okay, well, sure, being a part of this group's great, but am I going to individually and personally be enjoying the game on a day-to-day basis? So you also have to factor that in. So that's why I do think this is a good idea. I just don't know if I would say it's the best idea. If they do plan to start it early within the first week or two, I would probably just wait until things are settled and they really have kind of a solid mesh or a solid foundation at each of the alliances where you're seeing less and less player drop off and having to replace people, and then start kind of doing your data collection at that point. Okay. Let's go to the next one here, which I think is Warlords. Okay, so Amun here is the Warlord, and there was a very short piece, but essentially what they end up saying is that there just really isn't a lot to talk about right now because, one, they're not in a situation where they're going to be fighting. Now, I do think we're fighting early on because they don't know what's obviously going to happen in 42, but also there's no KVK right now. And however, what I will say is this. I do think that there was some opportunities here for Amun to talk about some of the things, even if it's just talking about kind of scenarios that could happen and maybe the most likely ones, and then saying, hey, here's what some of our plans are for that. Like, here's some of our plans if, and it doesn't have to go into an incredible amount of detail, but like, let's say that, you guys end up having to fight a civil war. Let's say you get into a situation where you are having to deal with players that are going rogue, or an alliance that is attacking you. And these are just things that are important to understand, even if you're just going to kind of give people a brief explanation on, hey, we do have contingencies and things in place that will address those scenarios. So I think there was a little bit of an opportunity to go into a little bit of that, but you can always do it later on. I don't think that that's like anything negatively impactful in the project. Okay. Next thing we're going to touch on is territory. And the territory more or less was, this was from, I think, Platis, but one of the ladies, and I'm forgetting her name, but she ended up speaking on this portion and just kind of talking about how, each alliance is kind of going into their own zone ones, and that how their plan overall is to kind of split some of the territory in each of the zone ones to fit, I believe they were saying, kind of 2 alliances per each, and that everyone's going to kind of have the equal amount of territory per each of the alliances, equal amount of objectives and buildings that they'll be able to capture, etc. So it's pretty standard. And then they talked about kind of the first 48 hours of what you can expect, and I'll just show that off, right? So Discord server locked down on the 16th. We're on the 18th right now, so this is server pick time. They've already done that. And then announcement of the server and go, and they've done that already, right? So we've kind of already... Oh, hang on, sweetie, come on in. And so they've already played that out. Now, let's get to... I think they talked about some guides. Let me see what the next one is. So this is kind of their plan up until the launch, where they said, we're going to observe what happens on the 17th. Likely not confirmed. This is the start time. Announcements, keep your notifications on. Right, voice channel will be open on the 18th with leads. And then I think there's another one here. Yeah. So this is just kind of guides that they have on the Discord explaining to everyone this is where you can go and find that information for Commander Basics, lineups, event guides, ultimate guide sheet for progressing and leveling up. And this was a good job because, again, you do want to make sure you're explaining all of this to people beforehand so that way they'll be able to get access and know where to go and find those things, along with announcements that can follow up as a complimentary piece. Then we will get to the map and starting zones that they touched on. I have to go a little bit more here. Here we go. So here's the map and the starting zones for each of the alliances and where they'll be. You can see Tanir just kind of doesn't have any of their alliances in because, again, they have 5 alliances, not 6. So this is kind of where each of them are starting off. And then also they list off in the next slide, right, that you can see here as of 6 days ago, they had almost 600 forms that were filled out. I'm sure that's a lot more now. They had 5 alliances, kind of talking about the banners that everyone was going to have. So I do like the fact that there is a sense of structure and organization on kind of how we're gonna, on how we want to be viewed and how we want to be looked at, where it's just like not everyone kind of doing their own thing. So again, I do like that. Then we get to the next one, which is basically the people that are in each of the alliances. And I'll show this off in case some of you are like, oh, you know what, that name is familiar. And I'm not going to spend too much time because, again, some of you guys can just kind of pause, if you will. Let me go to this one. Yep, that's the next one. And then let me see here where the next one is after that. And that's for the HMP Alliance. And then I think this is probably the last one. Yeah, and this is for GMP. So those are the 5 rosters. Now, again, then we move past and we have, what is this for member lists? We did that. Okay, so here's the next one at 3920. This is one of the first Q&As. And I'm only going to be playing the responses, but the question here was, if you don't get in to the kingdom, if you don't get into the kingdom on time, like, what do you do? What happens?
So if you don't get into the server on time, well, before we get to that point, if you don't think you'll be there on time, what I advise you to do is to message a council member or message a friend and tell them to start an account and just, be there on the server. Your main goal should be just to have a character or an account on the server. After that point, you can just level it up, catch up later. But if you do not make it at all to the server, then there's not much we can do about it, unfortunately. So you really should try to make it on. If you can't make it on, then tell a council member to make an account for you, or tell a friend, tell someone you trust to make an account for you at that specific time and join the server. Your main goal is getting into the server.
Yeah, so again, this is kind of a short one, but it understands that this is the realistic understanding, is that, and I'll show you this to you off in game real quick. So when we're looking in game, and we'll do this, dun dun, and let's say I zoom in, and I'm going to go to my profile here. Oops, let's do this a little slowly. So we click on our profile, hopefully the second time works, and then we go to settings, and we go to characters, if it clicks on it for me, and let's say I go to create. You'll see here that there's a lot of kingdoms that are already full. The challenge with this is that you cannot create a character in these kingdoms that are full. This kind of sucks because I hope eventually that it will open up to where you can create characters in it, because at the moment there's really no way to do that unless they do reopen at some point. Now, I've heard a report from some people that, or at least a couple people that have told me that some of the kingdoms that were full did reopen for a period but went right back to full. Again, if that is true or not. And so it makes it difficult because they're doing this hard lock where you have no way to go make a character in another kingdom. Now, maybe they're doing that because they just want to have more kingdoms populated overall. But typically, the way that it usually works is the newest kingdom, in this case it would be 42, would have all the players getting funneled there. Or if these kingdoms open at the same time, you'd have 41 and 42 getting like one player there, one player there, one player there, and that usually happens off new downloads aside from people that are making their own characters. And so if this kingdom fills up, which I would imagine that given that it's been open for 8 hours now and it hasn't been full, along with some of these other ones, there's a good chance that they'll probably be able to get everyone in here. But it's just to state that if that doesn't happen, you've kind of missed your window unless they do it, and it is kind of a hard window at that point. Now, if they open it up at a later period, then yes, of course, you could go ahead and still get in. I just wanted to at least make that part a little clear because it pretty much is black and white on that front. Okay, then let's get to 41. I have 4140, I think is this one here. No, sorry, 4114. This is good because someone asks, how are you going to deal with the Koreans or basically other like groups that may come in?
So about the Koreans, well, before I go on, I just want to say something. That I have been talking to 3 Korean groups, and they all want to avoid us. Even the Koreans want to avoid us. If that makes any sense to you. So let's say there are Koreans on the server. We'll try the diplomatic approach at first, but let's be real. Our goal here is to dominate the server. If there is no diplomacy to be made, then we'll just go to war. You know, diplomacy will always be the first option. We'll try to talking to them. We'll try seeing what they're about. But our goal here is clear. We will rule the server. We will dominate the server. There is no room for any outsiders. There's no room for an alliance, like a bigger alliance or a big group to be with us. Our goal is to dominate the server and make sure everyone understands why we're the top project in the game.
Absolutely.
Okay, so responding there, I will say it's good that Greedy and whomever else, if anyone else was involved beyond, did proactively reach out to other projects. This is something that I've always advocated when I initially started running projects in Rock, where back then I would reach out and I would go and search for people on the Discord, on the Facebook group, anywhere else I could maybe find someone or leaders or representatives from other groups. And I would try to get everyone into a Discord private group chat, right? I think you could have like up to 10 people in those. And so we would do that. I would friend them. I'd invite everyone and I would say, hey, it looks like all of us are going to be starting our projects around the same time. Would anyone like to coordinate? Would we like to try and figure out final landing spots so that way we don't have 2 or 3 projects going into the same kingdom? And it was always just more of a collaborative effort because every project, mostly I would like to believe, if not all projects, do not want to land with another project. Just because of, again, the fact that you could end up fighting and having a civil war, and that project's entire prep can be ruined, and it can be such a negative experience for players that were involved. And sometimes it can just have people step away and quit the game and just not even want to do anything again. So I do like this. Kudos again for reaching out and having that communication between others. On the part where Greedy says, you know, we do want to attempt to conduct diplomacy first, and if diplomacy does not work out, then we'll go to war. I do to an extent believe that that is an okay approach because, and again, he's probably very much simplifying here and really kind of dumbing it, I guess just making it very easy without going into too much detail, where if you do everything you possibly can and you've exhausted all parts in diplomacy, it also depends on what your goal is in the kingdom as a whole. Their goal is to basically, as they said, run the server and run the kingdom. So if, you know, and obviously in most cases, you probably don't really want to have another large project or multiple alliances that are competing against. However, I will just say, as far as a piece to err on the side of caution, kind of playing the devil's advocate, is that in a number of projects I've ran, sometimes you will have other strong alliances. And then there's this moment where it's like, okay, well, if the alliance leadership asks to be a part of your project and they want to kind of be in the club, you have to have a stance on, are you going to allow alliances into your project, or are you not going to allow alliances in their project, but you'll just kind of treat them as more of an ally? Or maybe you'll do some kind of NAP or non-aggression pact with them. You really have to figure that out, because I'll tell you right now, if you do not have a plan in place for how you are going to address other top alliances in the game, that can have negative consequences. Even if it doesn't happen in the short term, it can happen in the long term, and very much in unforeseen ways as it pertains to overall activity. Because the one thing, and I'll just kind of give a very small pro tip here, the one thing that you do not want to be full of yourself on is believing that your project's activity is the absolute only activity that you need. And I'll let that simmer and marinate for a bit with some of you to think on that, because there's actually multiple implications on what that means in and of itself, not only for the short term, but for the long term as well. So, but again, I think overall this is an okay stance to have. It just seems as though Greedy was coming off, you know, a little bit more assertive in that respect, as far as, yeah, it's going to, and again, I'm sure there's more to it, but oftentimes first impressions are really important. And if you don't take time to really dive into some specifics, even if you're just kind of going over bullet points, I might take this as it's, well, you know, don't mess with us or die, you know, join us or die kind of a thing. And again, even though those weren't said, that for the amount of products I've ran and the amount of town halls I've listened to for projects, it briefly kind of comes across a little bit like that, even though I'm sure that's not what that means. It just, some people could take it that way. Okay, moving on. Next question we have here is, let me see here. If we don't make an account on the 17th, will that impact account on the 18th? That was at 4250.
I mean, I can answer this one. It's fine.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Essentially, you know, the reason we're asking you to make an account on the 17th is because you know, the first time you...
And I'll just give the short answer here, now that I'm thinking about it. The reason that you make the account on the 17th for what they were saying is that on the first account, you have to go through the tutorial in its entirety, and you don't have opportunities to skip, if that is correct. And then after you make your first account, making your second account gives you the opportunity to skip, which means you can get into the kingdom and start leveling up your account faster. It also allows for you to finish the tutorial quicker in the new kingdom. So then the next question here is, how many characters can you make per kingdom? That was at 4424. And the answer here was that you can make one character per kingdom. I do believe that's the case, and we can actually just test that out real quick too as well. So if I was to open this and we went here, and let's say I go and try and make a character in a kingdom that I already have one in, which in this case I have one in 42. So let's go to create, and if I do 42, you can see you're already on the server. So it's not, oops, hang on, never mind, let me do this real quick. So it's not letting me do that. You can see I'm here. If I go here, it says create, but I already have an account here, and you see it goes off. So you're only allowed to make one character per email account. You can make multiple characters, but you have to use a unique or a different email and then bind that account or that character to the account, and then you can have multiple. So you basically would have to have multiple instances up of whatever emulator you're using, or log into a different email on your mobile device or tablet in order to then take advantage and be able to play with more than one. Okay, the next one here is how will, I thought this was actually a good one. 4458. This was, how are we going to get access to... This is how we're going to get access to other Alliance sections on the Discord.
And how will that work getting our Alliance Discords?
So I'd like to give you access to your channel now. I'm going to explain to you why we're not going to do that. So let's assume I assign you all to your Alliance now. And then once we start in the game, let's say maybe 20% of you actually don't make it into the game. Then I'm going to have to walk on the Discord again and make sure that everyone who made it in is in the game and has the role.
Okay, so the short version there, and this is absolutely right on Greedy's part. I actually think this is a good approach. This is something that I've implemented myself as well. And what he's saying is that if you end up having a significant or a decent amount or any amount of player drop-off where people that are there do not continue to play and just go inactive or stop, then you're going to have to do extra work. So what Greedy's saying, and now you could still do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that necessarily. But I think in Greedy's viewpoint, it's I would rather do this once and then maintain rather than do it right away and then potentially have to do a bigger level of maintenance after before we get to just like the standard maintenance or the standard maintaining portions. So again, I do agree here. I think it does make sense. Next one we have here is how will alliances share rewards in the 5 zones? I thought this was a good one. 46, 45 we're going to go to.
So essentially, kind of as we touched on earlier, we'll be tracking every player's progress, and, you know, we'll be tracking your contributions in war, we'll be tracking your contributions to PvE events, and we'll be giving you a score the whole time. And by the way, this is going to be weighted, so if you're free to play or a small spender or whatever, don't worry about that. We're not going to hold you to the same standards as someone who's spending $100,000, right? And when it comes to capturing the the Imperial City, for example, the 150 players who have had the best contributions from the 5 alliances will get the first capture rewards. The Imperial City itself, at the end, will likely rotate it. To be honest, Yeah, our 5 are all friends. I know many of them in real life, or in Greedy's case, I've played with him a long time. So we're not too bothered about it, right? I know some people might have been projects before where people are worried about arguing over our king title and so on, but that's not really it for us. So that's not a problem. So yeah, just to reiterate, rewards are distributed based on contribution, not just what alliance you're in.
Okay. And I actually thought that this was a pretty good explanation. It does depend on how you want to approach the Imperial City in the game as they talk about doing things like rotating. So an example is if we sign out here and we go over to the Imperial City, and let's just say go. This is something that I think is really important because it's nice to be able to acknowledge and address this earlier rather than later for a number of reasons. You don't want this to be something that kind of comes down to votes or oh, I think my way's the best, or why are you not doing this because this is the best way. It's very important to have kind of a hard stance and just very clear goals on this is how we're going to do this. And if you let people know that earlier rather than later, they can then choose and decide if they want to join or if they do not want to be a part of it. And it also allows for more realistic expectations to be had because then it doesn't leave the question up in the air on, oh, well, how are they going to do this? Maybe I do have an opportunity to have my voice be heard as a member and really advocate for this other way of doing it, which sometimes when you are a little bit too aggressive as a member, I'll just say that there can be a level of undermining, and those things can sometimes fester, where at times it can even almost plant these seeds of doubt within leadership. And a big portion of this is how will leadership and the council handle those potential situations. And so when you just have everything transparently up front for how you're going to do things, and you give a good reasoning, regardless if someone agrees with it or not, at least they can understand where you're coming from. And if you still want to have those conversations at a later period and maybe just kind of go back and forth, you know, if it's privately or if it's in a VC or something like that, I don't see any problem with that. But it is important that people do respect the way that projects are being ran, unless there's just something so egregious. And I don't really think that anything on how you're going to either rotate or run a King's Alliance or certain numbers of alliances are going to rotate, I don't really think like that's where you need to kind of make your last final stand at. And like this is where you're going to kind of like, you know, die on this hill kind of approach. So I think doing the top 150 contributors where you're using one alliance essentially as a shell, and then you're just going to fill in and have the people that have contributed the most to give, I do think that that is one good way to do it. Nothing wrong with that. Rotating the Imperial City, where you have different alliances that will capture it, and probably everyone's going to build to it, and then you rotate who caps it, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with. I myself favor more of a King's Alliance, and the brief explanation on what that is it's basically a shell alliance where you have alliance leadership, and they basically kind of put their second accounts there, and then members in that alliance are only members that are alliance leaders, officers, and maybe any other trusted members that can help out with things like title giving, sending mails, if there's any maintenance or support or management that needs to be done for who runs it. And the reason why doing a King's Alliance has more advantages is because you can have everyone there. You don't need to keep swapping out. One alliance captures, the other alliance captures, and then you're also limited to the players that are on your alliance's team. So you have to think about, you only have one set of officers and one alliance lead compared to having all of the officers and all the alliance lead in an alliance. You have five times the amount of management staff in a King's Alliance versus individuals. However, that is something that each project has to kind of decide for themselves, and those are just kind of two highlighted ways of running it. You can do things other ways as well. Okay, next one we're going to end up playing out here is the... this is a good one. So someone asked at 4951 on, will there be mentors assigned to new players or assisting or there to help assist new players?
So I've already answered this in text, but I'll just answer it one more time. So when I made the role, which is internal affairs, when I made the role events management, I kind of thought about it this way. So the events management team, as I said before, they take care of events. They make sure that my members are making sure that they get the maximum amount of rewards for every event. Now, the internal affairs, the job is obviously managing the interns of the alliance, which means they need to make sure that every member understands what we expect of them and what they can So if they're confused, they're not sure what they should be doing, or they're not sure what they should be progressing in, they can reach out to their internal affairs officer, and that they should be taking care of that player. That's the current setup we have.
So I actually think that this is the appropriate way to do it. So if you're someone who's new, usually, and like we were talking about before, the internal affairs or events team should be handling a lot of that. Now, if they're directing people to reach out to internal affairs, that's fine, just as long as that is said and that process is public as well. And you should have all your events listed out. You should have all resources and information listed out in kind of an easy to find way, right? Because keep in mind, new players, not everyone is going to be Discord privy as well. So you really have to kind of create and think about how you're going to organize your Discord in like the simplest, most dumbed down way that you can think of, where it is literally foolproof in the regard of you kind of can't get lost, so to speak. And if people don't know where to find things or where to go to, it's nice to have a team in place to who they can reach out to. So I think this is very well done and put there. The next one we're going to do is about rotating players. So someone asked us at 5340 is where we're going to go for this one.
So I just would like to address this point.
Yeah.
I would like to address this point because I play the game and I'm, well aware of it. I've been playing for 7 months already. So when it comes to kicking out players or moving them or rotating them for rewards, the system is really simple. If we decide, for example, the Imperial City is a really important event. It's a really important reward, and it closes the entire kingdom. For example, if I'm talking about a capital level 9, then no, I don't need to distribute the rewards with everyone else, right? The reward will be given to a specific alliance, or the alliance is sharing a specific region. But when it comes to the Imperial City and the season end rewards, yes, there are season end rewards, by the way. I just want to mention that real quick. Those 2 rewards are the most important for us, for the entire family, the entire kingdom. Those will be decided based on your contribution point. Are you based in the 150 top contributors? Are you contributing to your team?
I'll pause it here because he goes on to kind of reiterate some of what I think Delis or one of the other individuals was saying before, which is that the beginning part about rotating. So sometimes people will ask about rotating players in sometimes a couple different ways. The first way, and probably more likely, is that players that are asking if we're going to be rotating are if they're either wanting or hoping or trying to get additional rewards. So that could be someone going from one alliance to another alliance in the same zone to get additional rewards, even if that alliance is not a part of your family. I don't necessarily see a problem with that if you're able to get them and they're just okay to, because if someone's going to cap it anyways and they don't have full capacity, why not allow for more people to get it? Like, for example, does it make sense to have an alliance that's, 60 members out of 100 capping an objective when you could just add 40 people in there and they can get some free rewards? Like, that makes a lot more sense than just leaving it empty. So that's kind of where people like the diplomacy department will also play a huge factor in being able to kind of set up some of those relationships, because sometimes you'll be able to add on rewards in those ways, right? If you're kind of unique and creative in your approaches. However, if you're talking about players jumping from family alliance to get rewards, that's something I'm a little bit more of a kind of a no-no on, only in the event of if you already have the players there to fill and you don't have any available spots, right? Aside from that, what about jumping to regions, right? In this sense, they're doing one alliance per zone 1, so you'd have to jump an entire zone 1. How easy is it to jump a zone 1? If it's easy, then okay, I still kind of feel the same way about it. If it's not that easy, well, then maybe you just kind of don't have people waste if they have to use a resource or an item or something like that to move across. Maybe you got to wait for gates to open and then you can. Generally speaking, as I said, if it's internal within the alliance, I typically say like, no, just stick to your alliance. But if an alliance absolutely needs people because they have open spots, then they'll do it on a first come, first serve basis. That, in my opinion, has always been a better way to approach those kinds of situations. And if they want to go and get additional rewards outside of the alliance, then I think that's okay, as long as, everything's kind of above board with the other alliances that are outside of the family that are willing to take people in for those rewards. Now, the other side of this is rotating players if you're looking to move from one alliance to another, because maybe that alliance's time zone and activity doesn't fit yours. Maybe you as a player are just not really gelling with the officer team or the leaders, and you want to switch alliances. These are just some of the reasons that can and probably will come up in this project as it has happened in every single one of my projects. It's really just a matter of kind of limiting and reducing the amount of people that can happen for. But some reasons are self-explanatory, and they do make sense. Other times it's a little more iffy and in more of a gray area where you kind of have to do a little more digging and a little bit more kind of TLC, right, tender love and care that you have to approach it with. And so it will be interesting if that ends up happening to them, and how much or how little, and then how they will address those things. Next one is, I think, a really great question here that was asked at 56 minutes, which is, if alliances become unbalanced due to varied levels of spending, will players be reallocated or transferred in order to balance out the overall power for each alliance?
Balancing.
So we have been answering this before, and I'll just answer it one more time. Balance is not a one-time thing. We would like it to be a one-time thing. Like, I would love to tell you that I will balance all the members now, and they will be perfectly balanced from now until day's end, right? But that's unrealistic. That's not correct. Balance is something you must maintain. That is something you must maintain over weeks, over months, if necessary, whatever we decide to maintain it for. We said we are starting with 5 alliances, but we may go down to 4 or 3. But we would like to have 5 main alliances that are strong and that are going into zone 3. But to answer the question simply, when it comes to balance is something that must be maintained. That means we will need to probably move some players at a specific time to balance out the entire map. Obviously, when it comes to recruitment as well, when we're recruiting natives, we'll be taking into account that point. So if I'm recruiting a native, and let's say my alliance is, I don't know, top 2, right? And then there is a disparity between top 2 and top 1. That means that top 2 and top 3 and top 4 and top 5 need to have the natives or recruit the native whales. Obviously, if there's a native whale, there's a native player, they shouldn't have a specific requirement where they want to go. So we'll just assign them to a specific alliance. Like, hey, you should go to AMP, you should go to HMP, you should go to GMP. Something of that sort. That obviously will be my job as the recruitment leader. I will be making sure that all the recruitment officers understand that we need to maintain the balance when recruiting natives. You can't just take the natives and just assign them randomly. Now, obviously, within the first 11 days, that's impossible, because within the first 11 days, you can't move to another region, which means if I need you to move to another region, you're basically stuck. That's impossible. But after the 11th day, everything will be open. You can apply to any other alliance. Like if you're in Tenor, you can apply to Eastland. You can apply to Eastland. You can apply to Olympia. You can apply to basically every other region, and it will be completely open. So after the 11th day, we'll probably look at the map, we'll look at the rankings, we'll look at everything, we'll analyze what needs to be rebalanced, and then we'll rebalance it based on what we think is the best approach.
Okay, so I actually thought this was a good answer from Greedy. And some of the things he mentioned are things that I've done in my projects in the past. So one thing he talked about in the beginning was that they may need to merge alliances. Even though he didn't use the word merge, he said maybe we may need to go down from 5 alliances to 4 or 3. That typically is done with merging or consolidating. Now that's whether you're doing a full merge to merge, or you're spreading out an alliance and maybe doing half go here, half go there, or a third go here, a third go there, depending on how much activity. But the willingness to understand that you may need to merge, I do think is a level of experience and some good wisdom there. Something that I learned pretty early on after doing a couple projects, that you can't sometimes be so hard stuck in certain ways, because that just may not always be how things play out. And even though my view on this is merging internal alliances within the project should always be the absolute last resort, you should always proactively look for other ways to do those things in order to refill or to bulk up activity, compared to just picking out your instead of going through your recycling bin, if you will. The other thing that he mentioned was that they may need to move some players around after some time has elapsed. This is a good approach to have, because it doesn't make sense for you to start looking within the first week or two of moving people around. Remember, we talked about this before. You have to allow a settling period for the dust to settle, for activity to settle, for player drop-off to settle and lower as well. And then eventually you can start looking at assessing and analyzing how each of the alliances are doing, where their powers are at, maybe what the average level of spending is going on in there, and pull some data, and then you can kind of go about. However, the important thing here, though, is that you need to make that information transparent. I don't know if Greedy and the Eternal Empire Project have already been advocating, or sorry, have been articulating that and explaining that to every single member, along with giving friendly reminders and announcements. Because I can tell you right now, if you haven't been doing that, when people eventually hear about that, that can rub people the wrong way. Because as time goes on, players will get comfortable in the alliances they're in, from socializing, from interacting, especially depending on how much they engage and participate. And so you need to make sure that you are consistently giving people those friendly reminders often. I'm not saying it has to be every day or every 2 days or every 3 days, but anytime you make an announcement that is going to include multiple things, I would mention it, even if it's in every other announcement, maybe once a week. Once every other week might be appropriate, but it has to be somewhat often, because you don't want it to go out of sight, out of mind. And then you end up getting people that are like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to move, right? People have to understand, and you have to explain that it is for the good of the group as a whole that you aim to do these things. And there's also good benefits on moving, because you get an opportunity to meet other people and also understand that your relationships, your social interactions are not strictly limited to in-game. Most of the time, or I shouldn't say most of the time, some of the time it will be on Discord. And that's really where you get that opportunity to join in voice calls, participate in like Discord events, and also conversate in people, whether it's on a Discord Alliance chat channel or a Kingdom chat channel on Discord. And again, those are just some things that I just want to make clear, because I've seen this happen far too often. The next thing he mentioned was assigning native players outside of the project to alliances. Now, this is important because it can also help with proactively balancing alliances, but that will probably be after day 11 on day 12, when you could start moving between zone 1s. But prior to that, from day 1 to 11, it's probably just going to be the alliances trying just to keep the alliance as active as they can, and then recruiting any places internally within their regions. Once you get beyond that, and you can have players, then you can approach this a couple different ways. You can fill in the lowest powered alliance based on the highest powered recruit that's coming in. Depending on the power of the recruits outside of the alliance, you can appropriately place them in alliances that you feel would be most appropriate. Like you might place someone who's 100k power in the number 2, 3, or number 1 alliance if they need someone, versus someone who's 1,000,000 power. And again, I'm just giving examples from the beginning stages. Then you may place someone who's 1,000,000 power in the number 5 ranked alliance, right? Who's over lowest power, because you're trying to bolster them up and attack the balancing from both ends. This is something that I typically apply, along with other things as well. And then he basically just also talks about how balancing, and I want to point this out, I thought this was such a great mention from him on how balancing isn't something that you just do one time. It's something that you will work on throughout the entire time you're in the kingdom, and it never stops. And it also takes a decent amount of work that you have to put into this. And usually it's a thankless job. The next one here I want to talk about is someone had mentioned at 5830 how to deal with alliances that are max capacity. Really, the simple answer here is that you just have to wait for the capacity to increase. And that will be done through donations, through if flags or forts or capturing buildings applies to that. And most of the time, it's just a waiting game until that happens. That's usually why you make staging or academy or farm alliances, and people can kind of hang out in there or in other alliances until capacity increases. But the most important thing is that if you can't get into an alliance, go and reach out to the officer, to the lead, and get in contact with someone of that alliance for the region you're in. So that way you're on some kind of a list if you're not already on it. Someone had also asked at 101.25... are we going to be having additional town hall meetings after they start in the kingdom?
So when it comes to town hall meetings, I've said this before and I'll just say it again. The town hall meetings will continue. It will probably be me yapping as usual. No, I'm just kidding. We'll try to obviously have a format similar to this one, where it's organized and it's good looking. But I think it will be mainly me, the main speaker. You know, I like yapping, I like talking to you guys, I like keeping you informed. But yeah, the town halls will continue at the same time every week, unless there is a war. So if I'm at war...
And I think this makes sense. I like how he also said what the expectation is. I personally am a fan of doing weekly town hall meetings. This is what I've always done in my kingdoms. And it's nice to have some kind of a format and a structure for what you're going to talk about before, similar to the standard and expectation they've set with this town hall meeting, by having it be structured and knowing what they're going to get to, and also allowing for a Q&A portion at the end. I think overall, the structure for this town hall meeting was well done, and I will be looking forward to see how they improve upon that going forward. But this is a nice blueprint that they have so far. The next one here in 104.30, someone asked, will there be a main alliance in the group?
Is always the main question, is there a main alliance? No. No, there is a main alliance, and that is the entire project. It was one alliance divided into 5 alliances, and that's how I view it. I don't view it as 5 alliances. I view it as one big alliance that had to divide themselves into 5 main alliances to basically accommodate as many people as possible. I think that answers, the question.
Yeah, so I again, short answer here, but this is direct and to the point. I think Greedy is right. The way I typically categorize this is that I talk about a project being an umbrella or a family. So every alliance is an extension of that family. It's an extension of that umbrella, an extension of what our goals, of what our standards are, of what our expectations are for everyone. And everyone here in the project is here for those reasons. They're here for the right reasons. At least that's the hopeful expectation. And so, again, I think that this answer is the right one. The next question here at 106.30 is going to be, is there enough space to fit 5 alliances in the final zone?
Alliances in the final zone.
Okay, so I'm gonna tell you here something really great about Age of Empires Mobile. Every region in the game is designed to fit 2 alliances. Okay, so let's do some math in here. 6 starter zones, or 6 zones that are called Zone 1. That means you can fit 12 alliances in each zone perfectly. Now let's move on to Zone 2. Zone 2 has 3 zones. Each zone can fit perfectly for 6 alliances. Now let's move on to Zone 3. Zone 3 can obviously also fit 5 alliances. I've seen it done in Kingdom 1. I've seen it done in Kingdom 2 as well. It's doable as long as the territory team is working together and making sure that everything is done perfectly. Now when it comes to another thing, capitals. Capitals, there is 1 capital per region. That means that some alliances will have to rotate the capital. Like even IMP will have to rotate the capital. There's capitals, I call it level 9 capitals in every zone 2. There is level 5 capitals, or I think, level 5 capitals in every zone.
Okay, so let me pause it here for a sec. This is, I think, really good to hear from Greedy touching on this point, as this really reminds me of Infinity Kingdom, the way they do some of their capitals that they have in certain zones. The things with capitals is that, and I think Greedy mentions this as well later on, is that they have their own title assigners, right? So you have titles specifically within these capitals, similar to the Imperial City, that you can distribute. This works similarly in Infinity Kingdom, where you captured certain capital buildings, and then from there, you were able to assign titles once you captured them. Him talking about you might have to rotate those with other alliances, I actually don't think is a bad idea, especially if you're looking to have more diplomatic favor with other alliances in the kingdom, and it's not just all about mine, right? You're willing to share. And so I do think that is a good thing. However, maybe he was just referring to alliances within their family. That could maybe be the thing too. But I do think it is a good idea to do that. In addition, really, you have to look at it kind of one of 2 ways. You're either going to have a lot of alliances in the final zone, which means that there's less overall territory, there's less overall gathering space, and there's less overall space to fit as many players in. If you have less alliances, there's more territory space, more gathering, but you may also have less overall activity in your kingdom, because Zone 3 is kind of viewed as a space that a lot of people want to get to, because it means that they've been able to play and progress throughout the kingdom in that season as much as possible. And that's also an enjoyment for people who are looking to get that kind of 100% complete or have that fulfilled approach or mentality to the game that they're playing. And so it really is a toss-up. Do you want to have less space and territory to operate in, but you have higher activity for the kingdom as a whole? Or do you want to have less alliances, more territory to operate in, but then potentially less overall activity in the kingdom? So you kind of have to make those decisions and decide for yourself on how you want to approach it. I will tell you this. I, for one, am usually always in favor of having more alliances in the final zone than less, because I just think that there's a bigger overall net positive than there is a net negatives. The next thing here, I thought that was another really good question from, I think, Sandy, that asked this was at 109.16. The question was, is there a democratic system to decide on major alliance actions, or is it just the council that makes decisions?
Likes to, consult others. I've been asked this before. People look up to me as the council leader, king, whatever they want to call it. I don't see myself as that person. I see myself as the person that's doing the dirty work. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. I'm the one that's doing the dirty work. I'm not the king. The king is the entire council. The council is the king. So I just want to go over something here real quick, which is, do we have a voting system? Yes, we have two voting systems. We have a voting system in the council. We have a voting system in the leadership. The council being obviously higher than the leadership. We do most of our votings in the leadership, but if it's a really important, case, then we'll talk about it in the council, and then we'll vote in the council. Most of the time, it's really obvious if we're going to say no or yes to a specific subject. We'll talk about it, we'll discuss it, we'll see what's the best approach, and then, decide it. We have, as I've said before, I've released the council member list. The council member list is public. You can see it in the leadership info. You can also see all the leadership members. You can see the leadership team. And yeah, we have a voting system in place. Actually, I'm gonna take a screenshot of the leadership voting channel and just show it to you real quick. But yeah, you can move on.
Okay, so this one's a little iffy for me, because I really would have liked for Greedy to say something more along the lines of, yeah, if we need to vote on things, then we will. Some things we may not need to vote on because it's just crystal clear based on the goals and expectations that we've already set for how we're going to operate in the kingdom, that we've talked about not only in previous town halls, but you can also find on channels within the Discord. The reason I say that and I view it that way is because I am very much of the belief that you do not need to vote over everything. It is very important for projects, and I usually see this as a massive opportunity that projects typically fall short on, is they do not list out as many things as possible for how they plan to manage the kingdom, for what the goals of the kingdoms are going to be, for what rules of the kingdoms are going to be, early prior to them starting. Because that is so massively impactful on also determining which players are going to want to join your project and not join your project depending on how you operate. Because if you don't set those expectations early on, then it can end up biting you in the butt later on in the kingdom, where people are like, well, I never heard about that. Oh, wow, you're doing things this way? That makes absolutely no sense. And the whole idea of trying to present as much as you can up front before you start being transparent is it reduces the amount of that potential backlash, or maybe not backlash, but that potential debate and rebuttal, if you will, from other people. And so him saying that, like, we have voting systems for the council and leadership, I don't see a problem with that. My only thing is that I would have just liked for him to be a little bit more clear on, hey, we will vote when we need to, but we're not going to vote over every single thing, and here's why. The addition when you have that approach of voting over everything is that it takes a lot of time, right? Because depending on how many people you have voting, the more people you have, the more time it's going to take. And it also gives you the opportunity to have more discussion and longer periods of discussion, because if you want everyone to feel included, you need to give everyone an ample amount of time in order to give a response in the discussion phase before you get to the voting phase. And the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more time sometimes it may take to cook the food. And also, I don't know if there's necessarily a reason to have like members voting on maybe important things. That really should be up to management. However, if it's a fun kind of event thing on like, hey, the events team wants to know what events do you guys want to try doing first? Here's a list of 3 or 4 fun internal events we want to run within the kingdom. Which ones do you like, or what would you like for us to do first, second, and third? That can be something that you ask for everyone to vote on. It has to kind of be appropriate, if you will, and if that makes sense. The next one will be at 111.50. I thought this was another good question that was asked from someone, which is, how will we compare 5 alliances with, how will we compete as 5 alliances with distributed buffs in something like KVK or SVS versus a kingdom that maybe has 1 or 2 alliances with more buffs allocated to them?
Because we don't know what the KVK buffs are, right? We don't know what they're going to be, how many there will be, so on. So, you know, I know, speaking from Rock experience, right, there is somewhat of an advantage you get from having these buffs. I'd still say having, you know, they've got 1 buffed alliance of 150 people. We've got 5 alliances. So, you know, the numbers advantage makes up for the small buff difference generally, I think. Again, we can't say for sure. We won't know for sure until we actually see the buffs in kind of a KVK format.
So I'm going to pause here. I thought this answer, very well done. This is someone, and again, I'm forgetting who the name is. I wish it showed the name up on here. But this is a great answer. And the reason why it's a great answer is because activity is king. The next thing that's king is spending, right? But activity is king because you can spend all you want. But if you don't have enough alliances that can push on potentially multiple fronts or enough overall activity to where you are not able to combat that amount, spending is kind of moot at that point. And I don't mean to say that it's non-existent and it's not relevant, but I am a very big believer that activity is number one, and then it's spending number two, and then, you know, whatever number three at that point would be, right, where it's like multiple alliances, etc. But why? I guess it kind of fits into activity overall for me. So it's probably like activity, multiple alliances, and then like spending, and then, you know, whatever else you put below that. But I think this is, again, a good answer because it goes into this idea of, if you have more overall active alliances, like I was saying, you can push from multiple fronts, more activity, you can drain potential amounts of stamina, or if there's AP usage or whatever it might be on the PvP fighting side, if you get drained from sending troops out, from doing PvP or not. Again, I don't know if it's more like Rock or if it's more like COD in that sense, but I am generally a believer in this, and so I just thought that this was a good answer because it was just direct and really straight to the point and really answered it in the way that it should have been answered, in my view. Let me see what else we got here. How will we handle players that... Oh, so here's another one at 112.55. Someone asked, how will poor actions be dealt with?
Can I answer this? I would just like to answer this. When it comes to punishment, we've already said this before, and I'll say it one more time. If you do something, it will depend on the severity of what you have done. You can't, for example, compare an insult in world chat to someone burning our entire family. Like, for example, if we have Mephisto on the server and the guy is burning the entire family, what do you think we're gonna do about it? For example, you know, if someone is disrespecting another officer, that's obviously gonna have punishment for it. If they're just being rude in general, if they're being malicious, like if someone is hitting another resource tile and then being like, oh, I didn't see their name, and they have done it multiple times. It will depend on the severity of your actions. It will depend on how many times you've repeated said action. It will depend on your general attitude. Are you someone that's currently, there's always those people that are trying to make sure they abuse the gray area. Every rules or all rules have gray area, like a gray zone. There's always people trying to abuse that gray zone. Are you someone that's doing that? If you're someone that's doing that, then obviously you're someone that's being malicious. You're not, you didn't just do a mistake. You didn't like break the rules by mistake. You kind of, put or done it maliciously. Now, obviously, all this will be investigated by the internal affairs team. That's why they're there. They're there to apply punishment. You can call them.
So I think that's probably all that really needed to be said there. Again, I think very well said. He gave a couple of situations and scenario examples that can play out. This is the team that will look into it. There will be an investigation if needed, and then they will distribute or action an appropriate punishment based on the severity. I mean, I think that's kind of all you can really say. However, I'm sure if those situations happen, people will pay attention to, what happened, what did the investigation uncover, and then what was the punishment that was handed down. And I will just say one of the things that people can potentially be, I don't want to say worried about, but it's something that usually comes up in projects, which is the appropriate punishment being distributed based on the severity of the action? And that is always going to be really important. So again, I think like with any project, you hope that these things don't happen. But at the same time, as long as you're appropriately distributing and dishing out a punishment based on what actually occurred, and people do find that to be, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? Should be no problems. But it is nice to hear the explanation there. Next one at 115.45. This is, what is going to happen, or how will they handle when players fall off of activity?
One originally with us. So I think there's like kind of two parts to this, right? I think, as we mentioned earlier, we will be tracking people. We will be tracking their activity and participation. So if we have a player and they're really active, but they're struggling with the power gain, or they're struggling with the events because they're new to this type of game, I think, in first instance, I don't want to just kick that player out, just because they're new to this type of game or need a bit of help. We're going to try and help them, and, we're going to appreciate them for being active and being online. I think if you have someone who, they played for a day, didn't log in for 3 days, they logged in for 30 minutes and they didn't log in again, I think someone like that, yeah, we're going to make room for them, right? That's someone who's perhaps not committed to it. we'll have a conversation with them, say, hey, do you still want to play? Can you pick up the activity? But ultimately, that person probably ends up getting removed, taking a native active player. In terms of, taking in players who weren't originally with us, our preference is, you guys have invested the time to come and join this Discord and contribute so far. So, yeah, you guys have priority, right? Everyone who's kind of filled in the forms or here now and so on, will we get taken in you in first before we look at any natives?
Yeah, so I think this answer is good. The idea is that, most of everyone who wanted to join the project is probably already going to be in the kingdom prior to you end up starting to see activity issues. So what that means is, like, let's say you had 600 people that were planning to jump with you. Well, within a 24-hour to 40-hour period, probably everyone who cared enough to be there is going to be there. And obviously had the time to do it, right? And we're not saying everyone, but the majority, if not everyone. And so in that case, you're eventually going to get all of those players into appropriate alliances to a point where then once activity starts to, kind of wean for potentially any players, then you would start looking at players outside of your project, right? So again, the native alliances or native players you would look at. That is just pretty normal, and I think that was a good answer. The next one is at 119.05. Someone asked about trash talking, I think.
Trash talking global chat.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I gotta take this one. So when it comes to trash talk, please try to limit your trash talk. Or for example, don't cross certain limits. What are the limits? Let me just go through some points. Religion, politics, race, though homophobia, if you want to call it that, transphobia, whatever they want to call it. You do not cross those lines. You do not be personal. If you want to say, X alliance is kind of weak, that's fine. I don't really care what you say about them, assuming they're not a family. They're not a family alliance. But obviously, banter, jokes, whatever, that's fine. That keeps the fun, that keeps the hype alive. I can't be telling you, don't trash talk. No, trash talk is part of the game. It's part of the fun of the game. Just do not cross certain limits. One more thing, do not insult another kingdom or another project. This is really important for me because you will fuck up everything when it comes to diplomacy. Don't do that ever. If I catch you doing that, then I will be messaging your internal affairs guy and being, hey, look at this motherfucker. He's talking about another project and he's talking trash about them. That's something I really don't want you to touch upon ever. Do not talk about other kingdoms. Do not talk about other projects in a bad or negative way. Yes, they are competition. You can have some banter with them. You can be like, hey, we're going to crush you in KVK or something like that. That's fine. But do not insult them. Do not call them any derogatory terms. Do not insult them. Do not swear at them. That's pretty much it.
Okay. So I thought this was well said by Greedy here, just kind of covering some of the general basis on as it pertains to trash talk. And I think that it probably goes without saying that, and I really like the part he added in here where it's not only you thinking about trash talking, but you have to understand that there can be consequences to your actions. And those consequences can be unforeseen at times, and they can also apply to relationships being built on and maintained in the kingdom. And that can also affect the diplomacy team in unforeseen or negative ways. I can't tell you how many times I've been in kingdoms or in a project and you've had some people that do this, and then the leadership for other alliances will reach out and say, hey, can you handle this or can you address this? Your players are being really mean, or maybe they're sending inappropriate DMs to other players. Like, it can really open an unnecessary can of worms that you just don't really want to deal with because you just don't have the time to deal with in the beginning, especially when there's just a lot more important things to be applying your time to. And so, again, I agree here. I think it's really important that I just think people just need to be respectful, right? Treat others how you expect to be treated. And again, friendly, competitive banter is okay, but the moment it starts crossing the line, like, I just feel like people have to be able to have some level of self-awareness and knowing what is okay and what's not okay. With that in mind, that is it for me. That pretty much covers the town hall here from Eternal Empire on October 12th, prior to their landing in 42 where they're at now. I will say this. Overall, my conclusion of the town hall is I thought that it was a really good town hall. They were structured. They had a format. They had a game plan. They had slides, whether that's a PowerPoint or something else. And they really came across professional to me. And that, I think, is really important. Regardless if you agree with the way they are doing things or not, they are well put together. And that is one of the most important things that I feel projects need to have, And I would almost maybe even go out on a limb and say this is probably the most well put together project that I have ever seen so far that I've reviewed. And that is saying a lot because I have done a lot of them. But it would make sense, right? Because some of these people I'm sure I know or have been in projects of mine or I've talked to. And so, you know, whether they've picked things up or taken things away and created their own variations and their own ways of doing things, it's nice to see that there at least are other projects that I can say that with confidence about. So again, really waiting and excited to see what Internal Empire ends up doing in Kingdom 42. That's going to do it for me. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. As always, until next time, we'll catch y'all later.